Hey everyone, hope your holiday season has been going well. Today I wanted to look back at the best games I played in 2025, or at least my personal favorites. Now, importantly, this list isn't only made up of games that actually came out this year. It doesn't matter when the game released, if I played it for the first time in 2025, it's valid for this list. I also have to have finished the games, of course, which I only point out because there were some instances where I played a game, enjoyed it, but didn't make it to the credits. Fear and Hunger, for instance. Great game, just didn't get around to finishing it yet. Anyway, before the top 10 itself, I wanted to throw out some honorable mentions, so let's get started with those. Cultic Chapter 2. Yeah, this one's a bit of a technicality, which is why it didn't make the actual top 10. The first half of Cultic already came out a few years ago, but the second half dropped this year, but it's also the full release. I don't know. It's kind of a weird way to put out a game, but whatever. I wanted to at least bring it up though, because in my opinion, Cultic is a top 3 modern boomer shooter, and this second chapter cemented its place in that role. Elden Ring Night Rain. I played this one quite a bit this year. Put in over 100 hours, got 100% completion, and beat every boss in the base game, both in co-op and solo mode. Also beat most of the Everdark bosses solo as well. So why do I only have it in the honorable mentions? Well, as much fun as this game is, it just didn't have the same draw as a full campaign for me. FromSoft's other titles, with their excellent level design and location variety and such, are simply much more appealing to my tastes. Night Rain basically just takes the core combat system of Elden Ring and makes a roguelike out of it, which is fine by me since it means I get to experience that combat system without committing to a full playthrough of a potentially triple-digit hour game. I will say though that I think Night Rain could do with a little more variety between runs, but despite all of that, I had a great time with this one. Dungeons of Blood and Dream was a very pleasant surprise for me this year. I randomly happened across it and bought it nearly completely blind, minimal spoilers, and man was it fun. Hunting down all the secrets and exploring this strange and unique world was quite a memorable experience. I actually made a video about it as well, if you're interested in more details. Grun. Well, this game was just straight up delightful. I've never really been into farming sims or anything like that, but oh, Grun is so much more than it first appears. A beautifully atmospheric and offbeat world, densely packed with secrets and garnished with a strange and off-putting undertone. Yeah, this is pretty much exactly my kind of thing. Very chill and interesting game that left a great impression on me. And now, with those out of the way, let's get into the list proper with number 10, Spec Ops: The Line. I know, you hear those words and you start expecting a 5-hour-long, overly detailed video essay. Don't worry, I'll spare you all that. For now, at least. Especially because this is definitely the kind of game you should go into without spoilers if possible, and I don't want to be the one to ruin it for someone else. So I'll keep this brief and simple. The main reason it took me so long to play this is because, frankly, it doesn't look like anything too special. I mean, just look at it. It's a cover shooter, pretty cool environments, but generally, yeah, it looks exactly like what you'd expect an over-the-shoulder military game to look like in this era. But I kept hearing bits and pieces and glowing reviews from people saying not to judge a book by its cover, and in this instance, yeah, they were right. There's something dark and insidious boiling just beneath the surface of this otherwise generic and predictable Gears of War clone. Even from the first moment, something about it is just off. And as the game went on, it delivered me a one-of-a-kind experience. One that kept popping up in my mind throughout the year to the point where I just had to give it a spot of honor here. Yeah, the gameplay doesn't get any better, and I'm not going to lie to you, that aspect isn't great. But Spec Ops: The Line has so much more to offer than that. And in some ways, the run-of-the-mill outward appearance even contributes to what's really going on here. I won't say any more than that. I loved this game, and if you haven't played it, you really should. Number 9, Doom: The Dark Ages. Boy, did this game ever get a lot of very undeserved shit. Was it as good as Eternal? Probably not, but you also have to keep in mind that it wasn't trying to be Doom Eternal 2. It was trying to be Doom the Dark Ages. And in my opinion, it really succeeded at what it was going for, and manages to stand among its peers as a solid and high-quality entry in the Doom lineage. The story kind of sucked, admittedly, but I've never cared a great deal about story in Doom games, so that's alright. What I do care about is the ripping and the tearing, as it were, and Dark Ages delivered that in droves. I enjoyed the more old-school style of combat and exploration. Eternal was a lightning-fast, adrenaline-fueled rampage, but here you've got a more methodical approach. Not to imply the game is slow. I've heard comparisons between the two, saying that Eternal is like piloting a fighter jet, whereas Dark Ages is more like driving a tank. While that may be true to some degree, that tank would have to be hauling some serious ass because you can play this game at a pretty breakneck speed if you want to. Also have to give a big shout out to the environmental design. Dark Ages took me places I never expected the Doom series to go, but I was more than happy to see so much location variety on display. Unfortunately though, my main complaint here would have to be about the music, which was just kind of okay. Serviceable. Acceptable. Which wouldn't be so bad were it not for most of the previous games in the series having some of the best video game music ever. Just kind of disappointing by comparison, I guess. Regardless, I loved this game. Definitely one of the best action games I've played in a while. And speaking of which, number 8, Trepang 2. Yeah, I finally got around to playing this. And yes, I liked it about as much as Doom the Dark Ages, albeit for different reasons. Dark Ages had the gameplay edge, with much more engaging and skill-based combat, but I connected with the story and lore of Trepang 2 quite a bit more than that game, so I guess I liked them around the same amount. Doesn't matter much anyway, the rankings are kind of arbitrary here, at least until like the top 3 or so. Anyway, this game ruled. Being a spiritual successor to Fear, which is a game that I do like, though probably not as much as most people. And to be perfectly honest, I kinda enjoyed this game more. Any issues I had with Fear aren't present here, but the things I loved about that game are front and center. Creepy, foreboding atmosphere, creatively disturbing lore, and of course the most important ingredient of all, the brutal, slow-mo John Woo combat. Everything you shoot in this game explodes 5 times more violently than it has any right to, especially the enemies. I also loved how this game was not at all afraid to lean into the horror side of things, with whole chunks of levels dedicated to building up tension before finally exploding into a high-octane showdown with some seriously gruesome enemies at times. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the kick-ass soundtrack too. Great music, great game. Moving on. Number 7, White Knuckle. I didn't expect to like this game as much as I did. In fact, I didn't expect to play it at all. I saw that it released into early access, I watched a bit of footage of it, thought the visuals were pretty cool, but the climbing mechanic looked suspiciously streamer bait-esque to me. You know the type of game I'm talking about. The ones built to watch a streamer, YouTuber, your friend, or whoever plummet down the side of a cliff screaming while losing like an hour of progress. And if you go to play the game yourself, you realize that's pretty much all it has going for it. White Knuckle is, however, not like that at all, thankfully. The visuals, as previously mentioned, are very nice to look at. The game has an appealing art style, and exploring megastructures is always a fun time. But what captivated me the most here and got me dumping hours and hours into the game, even after winning a few runs, is the mechanical depth. This game has a way higher skill ceiling than you'd think. The longer I played White Knuckle, the more I would start breezing through or outright skipping parts that I was barely scraping by in on my first few runs, turning the game from a tense, stressful climbing game into a speedrunning game one step at a time. I'm still not nearly as good as some people, but I did manage to get pretty decent, and even snagged myself a few top 500 worldwide placements in some modes, which is neat. I think I even managed to top 250 one time. All of this coming from the wide variety of unique and creative uses the items in the game hide. You get a tutorial for the basics, but that's it. All the advanced stuff you have to figure out on your own, and I love that. Best of all, the game isn't even finished yet, and it just keeps getting better. This is the only early access game on this list, and I wouldn't usually put one on something like this, but I just had too much fun with White Knuckle not to include it. Number 6, Crow Country. What a game this turned out to be. I think most people would be able to tell how charming it is just by looking at it, but what you may not be able to tell from that is just how high quality and refined everything is. This game is very polished, to the point where you can see just how obsessive the developers were about making every little detail just right, hiding items in obscured spots around the map, and making the entire product shine with professional quality, beginning to end. When you play a lot of indie games, you get used to a certain level of jank. It kinda just comes with the territory of small dev teams, which makes games like Crow Country stand out all the more. On the topic of the game itself, it's a classic survival horror experience with a few of its own twists and catches to mix up the formula. We've all seen PS1 styled horror games before, but I've never seen one with this kind of PS1 styling. Everything looks pretty cute and innocent at first, which makes the monster designs hit even harder when you finally run across them. I also enjoyed the story quite a bit as well, and exploring the map over and over, searching for secrets was lots of fun. This was just a world that I liked being in, and it also doesn't hurt that the soundtrack is fantastic. I've had it playing on and off since I finished the game. Great stuff. Number 5, Rain World. I really need to play this more. I finished the main campaign, but haven't delved much deeper into it, and there is way more content than what I played. I can tell you right now, though, with no hesitation, that Rain World is a pure work of art. Every screen radiates atmosphere with one of the coolest art styles I've ever seen in a game. I found myself swept up into a living, breathing ecosystem, the likes of which I'd never experienced before. Going to war for survival with complex and unpredictable enemies, learning new techniques for movement and combat organically and naturally, and dying over and over as I learned to survive a hostile world that saw my slugcat as concerningly close to the bottom of the food chain. That all combined with the immense amount of secrets and cryptic lore, and yet again, another great soundtrack to boot, set Rain World apart and made it an easy choice for this list. It's really an experience like no other. Number 4, Hollow Knight Silksong. Boy, what to even say about Silksong? What could I possibly bring up that hasn't been discussed to death already? After so much hype for so long, it finally came out, and man did it ever deliver. At least, I thought so. There was a lot more controversy around this game than I figured there would be, and I do agree with some of the criticisms around it. But when everything clicks into focus and the combat system stops getting in its own way, you get something very, very special. I went out of my way to get 100% completion on this game in a playthrough lasting 61 hours, and despite some rough patches, I don't regret doing that one bit. Also, there's a free DLC coming out in 2026 apparently, so that's kind of insane. $20 game, by the way. This is actually my pick for Game of the Year, since the top 3 of this list didn't come out in 2025. Too bad Expedition 33 is stealing all its thunder. Oh well. Silksong was amazing, and that's all there is to say about that. Number 3, Resident Evil 1 Remake. Over the past year and a half or so, I've been slowly working my way through the entire Resident Evil series. I already beat most of the mainline entries last year or earlier, which is why none of the others are in this video, but of the ones I played this year, RE1 Remake was by far the best. Now, I'm generally not a big fan of remakes, at least not the modern AAA remakes we've been seeing so many of recently. And there are many reasons for that, but this one is definitely a huge exception to that rule. I love the original Resident Evil on PS1 as well. That game is great in a different way, but there are so many things I really enjoyed about this version. I've often heard the opinion that this might be the best pure survival horror game of all time, and honestly, it's hard to argue with that. The gameplay loop is basically perfect. You're constantly juggling resource management, puzzles, exploration, and combat in such a satisfying way. The combat itself coming down to that old school survival horror style where winning a fight isn't so much about mechanical skill as it is about preparation. And of course, playing this after the original was a treat as well, because it knew just when to switch things up on me and throw me for a loop, using my knowledge of the original map layout and gameplay to test me in new and unfamiliar ways. And also, dude, that atmosphere, the vibes, dude. If there was ever an argument to bring back pre-rendered backgrounds, this is it. This game looks insanely good to this day and always will. Art style takes another W over graphical fidelity once again. Super glad I got around to playing this game. One of the best I've played in the genre, that's for sure. But there is another I played this year that I loved just about as much. That being number 2, Darkwood. Wow. Just wow. I had played a bit of Darkwood several years ago and enjoyed it, but ended up dropping it because it was just a bit too confusing for me at the time. And after returning to finish a full playthrough, I'm stunned at how much I was missing, and how good this game actually is. I feel like any blurb I write here just won't do it justice. It's the kind of game where you need to properly sink into the world for yourself before you start to get why it's so beloved. Darkwood is a game that I would love to make a full, in-depth video on at some point if I get the chance, so I think I'll keep this section simple by just saying this. If you like horror games, at all, play Darkwood. It's one of the best, most creative, engaging, and interesting games I've ever played. It won't be for everyone, but if it clicks with you, you'll love it. Just make sure to give it a proper chance. And with that said, it's time to move on to the number 1 spot. My personal favorite game I played in 2025. Hollow Knight. Right around the time that Silksong's big announcement dropped that it would be releasing this year, I was getting into Hollow Knight. Didn't really even plan it that way, but how lucky was I to get to experience both of these games for the first time in the same year? Especially since it took me a while to come around to this one. 6 years, actually, give or take a few months. I first bought Hollow Knight back in 2019, and back then my taste in games hadn't fully matured yet. I've been playing video games for most of my life, but it wasn't until more recently that I started to really develop my tastes and get much deeper into the medium. So, in 2019, I booted the game up a few times, liked parts of it, but ultimately dropped it because at the time it was just too hard and obtuse for me. I meant to get around to trying it again, but it just never seemed to happen. That frustrated me though, because Hollow Knight was the exact kind of game that I had since grown to love. So, much like what happened with Darkwood, I returned to it this year, and after a bit more struggling to get into it, finally, Hollow Knight hooked me. And it hooked me perfectly. So much so that it's now one of my favorite games of all time, as it should be. I mean, it's amazing, and pretty much everyone knows that already. What a revelation! Turns out Hollow Knight is a good game. Try not to panic. But jokes aside, this was my favorite game this year for so many reasons. The incredibly satisfying exploration and secret hunting, the progression, the simple but addicting and skill-based combat, the absurd underlying absurd amount of enemy variety, the gorgeous art style, the music, the lore, the story, the sense of discovery and adventure. All of these elements are things that I love in games, and Hollow Knight doesn't just have all of them, but it excels at all of them. And I think that's what makes this game so amazing. It isn't any one particular thing it does really well, it's that it does everything so well. It feels redundant to recommend a game like this because, let's be honest, you've probably already played it, or are planning to play it in the future at least. But I will say this. I know I'm not the only one who bounced off this game initially. So if that story I told sounds familiar to you, and you also had a similar experience, try giving the game another shot. Give it some time. You may just be surprised at how much you were missing out on. But yeah, I adored Hollow Knight. Silksong, of course, was fantastic too, but my adventure in Hallownest just has to take the #1 spot. What an experience. And that's the list. Hope you all enjoyed the video, and feel free to let me know about any games you enjoyed this year as well. I'd love to hear about them. But thanks very much for watching, folks, and have a Happy New Year. If applicable. I don't know when this video is coming out. But yeah, have a good one.